Happy Thursday. So glad you all are joining us today. My name is Taisha Ty Wilson. I serve as the Director of Engagement here at Philanthropy Together. And if you didn't know, you are joined into our collective conversation series. And we are so grateful and appreciative for all of you who have joined us every single month. This is a new series that we rolled out here with the intent to bring leaders, thought leaders in philanthropy together for us to have conversations around something of importance. And today we're talking all things data. Yes, data, y'all. Not the, boring data, but data. We're going to have a good conversation around the importance and unrevealing the power of data to drive social change. And so before I get into and introduce our amazing and dynamic speakers, I just encourage you all to engage with us. The chat feature is there. We can see y'all questions in real time, which we'll try to answer those. And we'll just jump right into the conversation. But let me do some grounding first, y'all, because data, we got to unpack the importance of it. Because it is enormously impactful in defining the why, right? And helping us to make more effective decisions and creating a more space for all voices to be in the room. In the world that we're striving for, we're all in this together, right? And we're all in the same movement to advance and make our communities more wholer and weller, and really to drive social change. And so data is immensely powerful in that regard. Local officials are using data, y'all, to drive governmental progress. Companies use data to inform their internal decision-making processes, align with their business objectives. Some organizations are leveraging data to address pressing social issues. That's what we're doing here in philanthropy, right? And with the evolution of things like new fields like data science, I know y'all have heard of data scientists. It's like a whole industry. And the ability for us to be able to apply these kind of analytical methods in our work is very important. And even outside of just the sheer volume of in the industry and how we're approaching data, the world itself is becoming increasingly data driven, with over 2.5 quintillion bytes of data, yes, created every day. And so across all industries, y'all, data is reshaping how problems are defined and how solutions are developed. And that's why we want to talk about it today and be in conversation with you all today, because we truly feel that we need to lean into the data before we lean into opinions and feelings, because data is facts. And then once we can recognize these facts, we then can put systems and processes in place to help us to better enable meaningful use of it. And that can help us to really drive social change and be more effective. So let me stop with my TED Talk and let's get into this conversation. I am joined in community with two dynamic sisters. This is my friends in this movement. Erinn Andrews is the founder and the CEO of GiveTeam. Give them a wave, Erinn.
Hey.
And Rebecca Darwent is the co-founder of the the Foundation for Black Communities, and my colleague here at Philanthropy Together. She's a senior advisor over our collaboratives work. And so welcome, ladies. Thank you both so much for being here. I know we'll have a good conversation to inform the people around our love for data and how we're all leveraging it and using it to drive social change. So, well, let's get the conversation started with just folks don't know. I always like to provide space for y'all to tell people like who you are. We see you. So why don't you start first with your work, with your organizations, and giving us an overview of what your organizations do and what you're doing.
Great. Do you want to go first, Rebecca?
Sure. Thank you. It's wonderful to be with everybody today. Thank you for having me as part of this conversation. I am coming with a couple of hats on, as Ty said. Primarily for this conversation today, I'll be talking as the co-founder of the Foundation for Black Communities. We are a community-led collaborative fund that is dedicated to investing in Black communities were created for and driven by Black communities in Canada and prioritize our flourishing and self-determination. We do that in three primary ways. First, through our grants and our mission-related investments. Secondly, we're a collaborative partner to the philanthropic sector, really looking at how we can help improve the sector's practices and policies. And then finally, we influence policy on a large systems level, really engaging in conversations with philanthropic partners, government partners, and corporate partners to see how we can change policy and decision making, ensuring that Black communities are prioritized and set squarely on the agenda. And so that's a little bit about the foundation. I come to this work as somebody who has been on all sides of social change, from frontline street outreach to public policy and grant making. And so I'm really excited to bring those hats to this conversation.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be part of this conversation. I do consider myself a bit of a data nerd and find a lot of joy and interest in thinking about that. So I'm really excited to be part of the conversation. As Ty said, I'm the founder and CEO of GiveTeam. I started GiveTeam about 1.5 years ago. Because there were some gaps that I saw in the field that I thought I really wanted to try to tackle and work on. So we are a philanthropic advising company. So we do philanthropy planning, which is not novel, but we work with financial firms and we support their clients, their donors in-house around coming up with a charitable focus. What do we care about? What causes, what communities do we want to support? The advisor supports the client around budget and vehicle, and then we make specific recommendations, usually for regional, local, community-based organizations for those donors to fund based on their priorities. So we're really trying to connect the dots for them and move them into action. And our goal is to help donors give more, give better, and give now. We want this change to happen today, not years from now. And the specific segment we're really focused on are donors who aren't in the top 1%, but are sort of in the top 2 to 10% in terms of their giving levels. So they might be giving away as much as $500,000 per year down to about $10,000 per year. And so generally speaking, those folks don't have a philanthropic advisor to talk to. So we're trying to create a scalable way to support that segment. So that's the niche we're trying to fill. And I use data in my work every day, so I can't wait to talk more about that. Otherwise, I've been working in the sector for about 15 years, thinking about philanthropy from a strategic standpoint, not just one vertical in, around like education or homelessness or something, but trying to think about how can we make the systems we have more effective, more efficient, better for society. And so I've done that in a couple of different ways, and maybe we'll dig into that as well. But glad to be part of the conversation. Something I love to talk about, data.
I love that. Y'all have such rich experiences and just are dynamic leaders and leading big movements and access to people and conversations. Before we even get into the particulars of how you are really driving data within your organizations, let's get personal real quick. Why do y'all even think that data, why is data even important? And what personally, what mind shifts has it provided for you all as leaders from the top down to help, just to get y'all in the mindset to lead organizations that are data driven?
Yeah.
You can start first since you're a data geek, Erinn. You should
go first. I'll go first. Okay. So I think data is so fascinating because when the first thing I think about when I think about data are just like numbers, right? Mm-hmm. And numbers like outcomes and impact metrics, quantitative, useful for sure. But I also think about behavioral indicators. So how can we leverage data for social change? That's so fascinating to me. Which pieces of information cause people to react in a way that affects positive social change. So a nonprofit could collect all sorts of different data points, but which of those are most effective and useful in helping donors feel connected to that group and make that leap and want to support that organization? Or how can I present information to donors in a way that touches their heart and their mind and moves them into action? So for me, a lot of my sort of why around data is, what do I need to understand? What do I need to collect? How can I quantify a problem? How can that help me then understand the right solution? Which pieces of these data are going to most effectively help me move forward? I think one of the big takeaways I've had is not every data point is useful. And so be thoughtful and mindful about what you collect. And maybe we'll jump into that topic later as well. But I'm just fascinated by, I don't think you can work without data. You have to know, like, what are my goals and how will I know if I've gotten there? You need data to answer those questions. Even if a funder isn't asking you for that, you as a leader of an organization, you need to be paying attention to those things and thinking about that, and preferably sharing it with the world so others can learn. I think everything I've ever done in my various jobs in my career has been a mind for, how can I take these lessons and share them with others so that others can leverage these data nuggets for their own purposes too, because maybe it can have a ripple effect. So, What about you, Rebecca?
That's awesome. I think the beauty of these collective conversations is sometimes we're on very different ends of the spectrum. And so where Erinn is like a data geek and super into it, I come to it from kind of being like data adverse initially and not really feeling like I could find myself in it. As I mentioned, I did a street outreach, and a lot of my work was collecting data from the people that I was working with. And as a social worker, you ask a lot of questions and you fill out a lot of paperwork and you're checking off boxes. And I felt as a frontline worker so disconnected from where like that data collection was happening to where the data was actually going. And in recent years, I would say I've become much more of a data convert, and I have become more educated on how we can use data and what data-driven solutions really look like and what it means to be a data-driven organization. The most powerful example that I have seen, moving out of that frontline work and into being a grant maker and working in the philanthropic sector, I would see report upon report upon report. And unfortunately, they would, good data was there, but it was stuck on shelves and nobody was reading them. And it wasn't catalytic in igniting change or changing those behaviors like Erinn was saying. And then I had the experience of being part of research that was done by the Foundation for Black Communities in partnership with Carleton University. And we wrote the Unfunded Report, which really ended up being a complete game changer in the philanthropic sector within the Canadian context, because for the first time ever, we analyzed publicly available data about foundations, both community foundations and private foundations, to see what their giving level to Black communities was. We had data points previously from Black communities themselves, anecdotes, that qualitative piece saying we're not accessing these dollars. Why is this sector so difficult to engage with? And through both the research that we did that went into the Unfunded Report, as well as a community needs assessment, between those two, by speaking directly with Black leaders across the country, we're able to find a really interesting story. So in some cases, data, when you pull it together, it becomes a story and it tells you what the reality looks like. And we were able to find that for every $100 that was going out from Canadian Philanthropy, only 7 cents was making it to Black-led organizations. And so the numbers were shocking. And I remember seeing the preliminary data come in, and it was just charts of zero after zero after zero after zero. And we thought, okay, what if we looked at, and we were doing the largest foundations, what if we looked at the middle foundations? Would that improve the outcomes? What if we look at the smallest foundations? Would that improve the outcomes? And unfortunately, across every single metric, we were seeing the same things, just like next to nothing going to Black-led organizations. Now, what we did with that data is the powerful part, and why I get excited about being a data-driven organization, because we were able to then use that as a galvanizing tool to bring people in on the journey and have, really, really large social justice oriented change in the philanthropic sector, to the point that I can say that today the sector does not look like what it did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And I'm so excited to see, as we continue to collect data, what it'll look like in the next 5, 10, 15 years in the future. So it can be very powerful, and it can paint a picture that we can at least be on the same page and say, okay, are we talking about the same thing? So that's how I've witnessed it be a tool for social change.
You said so many things, and before we even get to the how y'all use the data, because we're going to get to the specifics of that, Erinn, Rebecca, that human stories piece, because we talked about this in our prep. That's so important, because it all, like, when we think of data, you think of numbers, but these are human stories. And when we bring that humanitarian humanitarian aspect to the data, then now we're on to something. That's where we see those mind shifts. That's where we see those heart shifts. Yeah. And so I just love that so much, because that framing. And can you please share that statistic one more time? I think the people in the back need to hear you.
So for every $100, so you imagine a $100 bill, and then you put next to it 7 cents. So a nickel and 2 pennies. For every $100 that goes out, 7 cents is going to Black-led organizations. And so it's, a lot of times we say like 1%, and sometimes it's actually 0.1%. It's like not even, we're just not even getting to the dollar. So, and I will say that across many equity-seeking groups, we see this very similar statistics, whether it's Latinx communities, LGBTQ+ communities, Indigenous communities. Yep. Sadly, the data is showing very similar stories. And again, it's kind of, okay, so we have these numbers and we're seeing a very similar picture being painted. What can we do to shift? How can we get towards improving those numbers? Because I think we're all in this sector for good, for that heart-driven purpose. Yep. And I think it's easier to align to say, okay, we know that this is not looking good. The data is not looking good. Mm-hmm. How can we improve it? And what actionable steps can we take?
But we need that data in order to quantify the magnitude of the problem and the discrepancy and the disparity there. Without it, we can just, it's just conjecture. But with the data, you can say, no, this is how big of or how significantly underfunded these communities are. And I know that in my work, I rely a lot on the percentages. I will butcher them now, but 1%, 2%, 4% that go to, women and girls organizations, Native-led organizations, Black-led organizations, LGBTQI organizations, the percentages are so small, but if we can quantify that for donors, and I do in many conversations, folks often want to fund the underfunded. They want to feel like they can have a disproportionate impact on something. If everybody's doing this, then I want to do this other thing. And while it's an unfortunate reality, we can hopefully leverage some of that momentum or inclination to want to fund things that are less well-funded.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Super important points that both of you made. And Erinn, I'm glad that you even brought up because you also, very similar to Rebecca, have done research and taken a look to unpack it from a donor behavior. That's what you were saying earlier, from that donor behavior and trends piece perspective. And that's also important as we all as leaders. And that's why I wanted y'all to get personal with that and share the why it's important, because all of us, especially when we are leading organizations, people are following us and we're out here advocating and dropping numbers and such. It, as much as the numbers paint the story, to have the experience and the human element and be able to back it up. I just think that that's very powerful to know. And all of us, this is a best practice for all of us to lean into as leaders in this movement. And so, Erinn, can you speak even a little bit about, I know that y'all recently did some data reports. Y'all have have a new initiative around the data reports where your team has that research arm and are taking a looking internally at some things. Did you want to share a little bit more about that piece? I know that that's something new that your organization is doing.
Well, one of the things that we do in order to support donors, so we will walk them through an exercise to identify what they care about, causes, communities. And then we match them, we present and suggest specific nonprofits for them to fund based on their priorities, or participatory funds or issue funds or collaborative funds. And in order to do that, we build databases, massive databases of organizations in different regions. And in order to do that, we rely on data, right? We need to know who's out there, who's doing what. And so we will rely in many cases on what the organizations have self-reported through GuideStar, and we look at their website. And so, that's what's going to help us paint a picture of who's out there, who's doing what are your programs, what impact have you had, how are you engaging your community, who's leading your organization, all of those kinds of things. So when I think about that, and if there are any nonprofit leaders on the call, my plea to them is to really maintain that information in those records. Because my goal is to not actually put any burden on an organization to be considered, right? I don't want them to have to go through some kind of application process to be, considered. We look at a few different pieces, but keeping those reports and those websites and information up to date is critically important. We have a number of donors who want to fund with a justice and equity lens. And so, if that is something that your organization leans into, either through leadership, the communities you're serving, the way that you think about your work, your advocacy efforts, making that really clear and self-reporting and disclosing through those various channels is really helpful. When we look at the donor side, then we're able to share with them more about the specific organizations. And that's kind of been an interesting learning as well. Which pieces of information do I share with a donor in order to move them into action? What nuggets do I draw from that database in order to, paint a picture that will be motivating and inspiring? So far, what that has looked like is, certainly one's mission is so important. How you, in a sort of concise, succinct way, describe, this is what we do. This is the heart of what we do, why we do it, right? That mission statement is so important, and that's the sort of grounding piece. But then we share with donors, well, what kinds of programs this organization does. They serve this, they serve that, they have a program to do such and such. So helping the donor really imagine what that day-to-day is like for your organization, how you're interacting with the folks you're supporting, what successes you've had, or what really interesting, things you've learned in that process, and sort of sharing that bit of information. We also like to share who has funded some of these organizations, because that's a chance to sort of show how you're connected with the rest of the ecosystem. Can be great. And then just having impact stories. I think one of the things that I've learned over time is not wanting to have to force any nonprofit into one bucket. And I think as we think about people wearing different hats, the donor, the individual donor, or the foundation, the institutional foundation, or the nonprofit. My hope is that nonprofits can tell their story the way they want to tell their story, in their own words, through their own numbers and storytelling and people, and that funders will be ready to listen and receive exactly in the way the nonprofit wants to share. So rather than trying to fit exactly a perfect bucket. And so my plea or call out for the funders out there is to think more broadly about how you collect data and how you ask organizations to report on data. I know some really great funders who have shifted their practice in recent years to really go on listening tours. And they will sit down with those leaders or do a Zoom or have a coffee chat or a casual phone call check-in as they're running between appointments. And the program officer takes the notes and writes the report, not the organization. The organization can just have a conversation, say, hey, this is what we're thinking about right now. Here's some great stuff we've done. Here's some challenges we're having. Do you have any connections for us or ideas? But it's a conversation, and it removes some of that reporting burden off the organization and puts it on the program officer for them to fit into their own box in the way that they want to for their reporting purposes. But that's just one of the practices that I think is great, and I hope more funders will think about that as well.
Of course. That's a lot of ways in how you all have been able to leverage those data reports, Erinn, seriously, to make it make sense for your donors, right? And to customize the conversations, the messaging, all of that in a way where we can start moving the hearts and the minds. That's what we're talking about. And that's the power of data. So Rebecca, please share. So how did y'all use it? So you had this report, the underfunded, and y'all need to read the report. I mean, Rebecca shared the stats. The report is really, really good. But it blatantly showed that how philanthropies in Canada were just failing Black communities. And so then what did y'all do about it? How did y'all use the data? What did that post report and research look like for you all?
Yeah, so it started to look really exciting really quickly. I remember we were joking as a team when this report was being written. We had these webinar report out conversations to the community that we had hosted with a partner. So we didn't see any of the webinar registrations, and we had like a speaking of data, an important data point, like who signed up for your webinar, right? And so we had a session on Saturday scheduled for this Saturday. And we're a small team of 4, right? And we're like, okay, so if it's less than 20 people, then maybe we'll postpone, instead of having it on a Saturday, we'll postpone to the Monday. But if it's more than 20 people, we'll have this conversation. And across the 5 sessions we did, we had over 200 community members. And on the Saturday, there was like 50 people who showed up to hear our report out. And so I think it also kind of like not flies in the face of, but people want to know, like when you ask them, they want to hear, they want the context behind it. So I was floored. So that was the first step, is really saying, okay, this is the state of where we are with this data and what we found. The next step was we started to go on a bit of a tour with political and government parties to let them know what was going on. And really, we met with over 40 elected officials to share like the wide gap that there was within the sector. And we also did that with like a bit of a tour of philanthropic partners to say, like, where are you in this process? Like, especially, again, in a sector that is supposed to be for the community, that has these dollars are already dedicated, like they're sitting in bank accounts, they're ready to be deployed, they're already set aside for charitable activity. So it's like, great, we have technically no barriers, right? If we've already made the decision that it's in this account and ready to go. And so we really started to share the information kind of with those 2 sectors in mind, the public sector and the philanthropic sector. And we started to apply pressure to say, like, this is what these results say. What is the response? And in Black communities, we have a bit of a call and response action play. You know, when somebody needs help, you put out a request, and the model of Ubuntu, like I am because you are, we all rise up and support each other collectively. So in addition to having those conversations as an organization, we met with elected officials with Black-led community organizations across the country. So every conversation we had was with community, and we were able to, you know, collect hundreds of signatures, have several town halls, galvanize people, and you know, the success of our campaign led to a historic commitment from the federal government of a $200 million commitment to Black communities in the form of a capital transfer, you know, for these dollars to be stewarded by the Foundation for Black Communities. So huge, you know, this kind of mobilizing is, quite frankly, almost unheard of in a global context. We have not seen that kind of commitment in other jurisdictions. And the coolest part of it is that that becomes a template and a roadmap for other people. It's like, what would it have looked like if that report had sat on a shelf? And it requires, you know, everybody in their personal sphere of influence and control. You know, I am somebody who's a philanthropic sector leader. I know this sector. I know how dollars can move. I know who to talk to get them to think differently about their work. So I kind of like unlocked there was no stone left unturned. But the best part was everybody who heard about it was like, okay, what stones can I unearth? You know, in the government space, in the community sector space, in, you know, we had these small community churches in rural Manitoba who were signing up and signing petitions and saying, like, this work matters. Like, we need these dollars. We need this support. And so what was really beautiful was everybody saw themselves in this. It is a statistic, you know, the statistic is about Black communities, but it's about all of us. And a gap in one sector and in one community reflects on everybody. You know, that means that we have Black leadership that's not coming forward to the table. Black youth are not coming forward to the table. And we all benefit when we have like a holistic approach. And so, you know, this is an opportunity of a lifetime to see data and research move countries' policy. And that is the real magic. That is like the spark of what can come up. So it's having the data and then also knowing what to do with it and where to put it and how to, and, you know, like, we have the report. The report is written in an accessible way. It's using language that you can, you know, get through pretty quickly. It's not academic. It wasn't in, you know, a research journal that didn't see past the institution. You know, we were able to really make it accessible and allow multiple people to see themselves in the work.
That's amazing, because I truly believe that like effective collaboration requires like a single source of truth and a shared set of facts. And it sounds like your report was that for your community, and everybody saw themselves in it and ran with it in their own way, in their own voice. And that is that's how we make, to your point about the significance and that gift, and it's unheard of, but that's how we make progress, right? And having those conversations from city council members all the way to like everyday, right? And so it's no regard of persons,
right? No,
right?
exactly,
right.
that's
And
it.
so
That's
I love that so much. So when you said y'all were applying pressure and having these conversations, I'm wondering, because here, you know, those same stats even show up here in the States, Erinn. We know that, right? So talked about Canada, but this is the same stats, people. We're saying it's very similar statistics here, 8% when it goes to communities of color. There's over 900 billion in assets that's like in endowments here that are in trust. Folks hoarding money, but so how can we collectively? I want to bring this together because we're in this together, like y'all said. What do y'all think is getting in the way? So now we have the data, we have reports like the ones that you have ran, Rebecca and Erinn. We have all this data. So what do y'all think gets in the way of philanthropy addressing the inequities? Like Rebecca, you say y'all are applying pressure, but I'm like, but it's right there. Like, what is getting in the way of y'all addressing these inequities that we see? Like, what do you think, Erinn?
Yeah, so there probably are so many things one could point to, but the first one that comes to mind is so much of philanthropy goes to the large, well-established, well-known institutions, whether they be education institutions or hospitals or research institutions or the big national, international entities. And I have nothing against those groups, and they're doing great work and they need funding too, but such a disproportionate amount of the dollars go toward those groups, and so much less goes to the smaller, local, community-based, community-led organizations. And why is that, and what can we do about it? So I think part of it comes from many donors just not knowing, and that might be not having time, not having the volition, not trusting. There are any number of reasons why someone would default to the well-known, the well-established. I have a connection to it because I went there, my kid went there, I had treatment at that facility, it's a disease close to my family, whatever it might be. But it takes more to, in many cases, it can take more to help connect people with local, smaller organizations. But it is magical when it does happen. And what I'm experimenting now with, to a certain extent, is what if the majority of the options we dish out to individual donors are those local community-based organizations, where you don't need me to find your local major university or well-known entity. If I'm handpicking organizations based on what you say you care about, and that are aligned with those efforts, I'm going to add more value if I can identify some of the smaller, less well-funded organizations, and then you as an individual donor might have more of an emotional draw and connection to, oh my gosh, my dollars really will have a disproportionate impact, which is what people want. They want to make a difference. If you give that $10,000 to a big national group versus a tiny small organization that has a 100K operating budget, that's a big difference. When we work with donors who say they're open to funding nationally or locally, and then we present them with options from both, they're so drawn every single time to the local organization. So there's something there, but I don't know that they would necessarily take that leap without somebody connecting those dots for them, unless they are in that community or in community with others to bring those options forward, because most donors don't sit around looking and searching for organizations, right? They're not like, oh, wake up in the morning, first thing on my list, find a new organization to fund. Like, it doesn't happen. But if they're going to sit down and be purposeful in thinking about what do I care about, anyway, so that's one thing that I think could stand in the way. Also, sort of structures that we have. I love donor advised funds for a lot of different reasons, but the order of events is a little bit backwards. The donor gets a tax deduction right away and then can figure out later where to make those gifts. The intentionality is to get that money into society and do good things, but a lot of times, life gets in the way, and that might stop those dollars from going out. I believe people are well intentioned, but it can be challenging to then come back to that and say, oh, what did I want to do with that money? So I think those are some challenges that come to mind, but they're not insurmountable. Like, we can do things about this. We can, anyway, I think there are lots of things we can do about this. And I also think collective giving is one way to unlock some of those pathways into more local community-based giving, and to help, address some of those inequities in funding structures. And I think giving circles are one of the best ways to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is something else we can talk deeply about, of course.
No,
I want to talk too, so I'll stop there.
that was a good segue. But Rebecca, I would love to hear your thoughts on what you think is standing in the way.
Sometimes I think that it's like mindset can hold people back, fear of action, fear that you're going to get it wrong, fear that there'll be pushback or blowback, or like sometimes data can be pointed without, any flaw, but like the numbers are the numbers. So it's like, it's not a calling out or a shaming. It's kind of like, here's the basis. What are we going to do? And I think that fear of getting it wrong can lead to analysis paralysis, or too much information can also lead to analysis paralysis. The volume of information and distilling it down can be overwhelming. I learned something today in terms of like quintillion, like the volume of data is huge. And so I think that as Erinn said, these things are not insurmountable. We can get to the next step, and sometimes it's a micro step, sometimes it's a big step, but it's also kind of easy. Like sometimes we get tied up in the sector and think that it's hard and think that it'll take a lot. And the on-ramps are actually they're present and they're there. So let's use them and be brave together and courageous together.
What I like about that is let's use data, but let's not overthink data, maybe.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
Don't let it be paralyzing, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
We want to leverage it for good and move into action.
Mm-hmm.
And Erinn, you definitely ushered us into this next piece. What I want to talk about is collective giving, because I agree. Y'all know I am a leader of a giving circle. I am about this mission to democratize and diversify philanthropy through the power of collective giving, through our work here at Philanthropy Together, and just with conversations like this and just out in the movement. Actually, so I want to pull a data real quick and then ask y'all the question. So Giving Tuesday, they recently published a report. It's called the Look Back Report. And there was 3 highlights in it that are 4 key takeaways that I want to share out. Globally, the vast majority of people gave to others. So to your point, Rebecca, yes, we are spirited. We still got room to go, y'all. We're in this together, right? Mm-hmm. So it just shows you the spirit of giving is still alive and very much well, right? Giving behaviors are highly cultural dependent, with radically different giving ecosystems that vary by place, right? So that speaks to the need of us to diversify, right? And why that's very important. Younger generations were more generous than older generations globally, right? Again, more representative voices into this giving space. And then this last piece here in the US, both donors of money and dollars were down. And that is where I feel like collective giving circles, all of that can come in to open up as we talk about ways and how we can get more everyday people that have traditionally been underengaged in philanthropy, and show them that this is community and you have your village of people, and how we can multiply and quantify our collective impact when we give together. So that being said, Erinn, you said not everyone's going to wake up and say, hey, I want to look up an organization to give to. And I think you're spot on, right? So my question to you all is that for the everyday folks, younger generations of people, my nieces, our elder, like people in rural areas, right? How can everyday people use small data to help them to better inform, like to have some strategic, because we want what we need people to do is to be more strategic, more thoughtful, more intentional in their giving. But what does that look like for the small you know, like for the everyday donor to use small data to help them think like that, like where to give to and, you know, what organizations to support, how.
I'm happy to take
You are.
You're right. I think it's one of those things where you don't need to overthink it too much. So I think collective giving is such a powerful tool, and it can be small dollar donors or big dollar donors. There is no limit to, you know, what you might pool together as a group. I think, though, in many cases, it takes a really dynamic leader with the conviction to bring people together. Because then you can recruit the first few folks and then have them recruit some more, and then you're creating. So you need somebody with the vision and volition to sort of bring this idea together. You know, you really just want to start with what you care about. And once you have clarity and specificity around that, it is, we want to fund Black women-led organizations in Baltimore, or we want to, you know, return land to the Native folks in Northern California, or we want to, you know, have every kid in this region learn to read by second grade. Whatever the goals are of that group, you want to have some level of specificity so that you have clarity. That's your strategy. That's what you're going to drive your dollars toward. And then it's a matter of finding organizations that's doing that work. And you don't need to look at extensive financials and big reports to understand, are there good organizations out there doing great work? You can let just Google searches, really, you'll find a lot through Google searches. You can check GuideStar, publicly available information. More organizations are keeping their information up to date, so you can learn, what are their programs? Their websites should have this too. What kind of work are they doing? Can you volunteer? Maybe you go as a group and you experience that community together. But you don't want, and there are just lots of data points along the way that you can pick up on. And most organizations that we're looking at are reporting on this kind of information.
Sure.
You don't need to overthink it. So I would say, get a group of people who care about something deeply, and it can be a group of women, it can be a group of teenagers, it can be a group of colleagues at work who care about something, but you come together to form a collective vision of what you care about as a group, and then you're moving that money into action with community. You don't need to overthink it. There's a lot of great information out there at your fingertips that anyone can access.
Building on that, the thing that is like the secret sauce of collective giving is accountability, right? You're accountable to the people that you are in community with to pool the dollars and to decide where they're going to go. And then you're also accountable to the communities that you are connected to. So for everyday donors, I often think of like, where do you live? Where do you work? Where do you play? Right? And ask yourself, when you're going in your neighborhood, sometimes our neighborhoods can start to look very monolithic, and like who's missing around you on your drive, literally on your drive to work. What neighborhoods do you drive through? What neighborhoods do you go to? What neighborhoods do you not go to? And just ask some questions, like even like data-driven questions: who, what, where, when, why, like the questions that we learned when we're very young. And then the accountability is to communities that are in need. And oftentimes they're asking. So just as Erinn said, it's not hard to find them in terms of like Google or asking people around you. But I just encourage anybody who's curious about where to start, just like map out your life. You know, where does your business operate? Like land in terms of Indigenous communities, what land are you on? Like what communities were here before you got here, before your ancestors got here? Like, can we ask that question? And who's not in the room? And just be curious, like what might they ask for? What have they already asked for? And start to bridge, collective giving allows an opportunity for that bridge building and relationship to be created.
So I have, for all us everyday folks that are out here and looking to support organizations, holding ourselves accountable, mapping out our lives. So looking proximity, right? So taking a look at where you at. Google search. Google is your friend. You can safely Google. There's some good data on a good Google search. Ask questions, people. Ask questions to us, to your friends, your peers. Ask them who they're supporting, and don't overthink it. And I would build on to, because all of that is, I wholeheartedly agree with what y'all are sharing. I think that small data, even when I think about myself, like I didn't grow up in a family that was using the word philanthropist and philanthropy, and that formally wasn't there. But I was able to draw some connections and recognize some patterns and such, and some insights by just looking at my community, and that carried me forward even, and helped inform my decisions as I got educated and went on to, advance my career in philanthropy, just being aware, recognizing patterns. And there's so many reports, y'all, that exist out there already. I mean, amazing reports. And I want, if there's any reports that y'all have in mind, I want you to share them out. I have a few that I definitely want to. There are reports, Bridgespan and Eco and Green did a report, and it was called the Racial Equity and Philanthropy Report, that really shed light on the discrepancies that exist within philanthropy. I would encourage y'all to lean into that report. I mentioned Giving Tuesday is a good source, incredible source. They're always releasing reports and information for us, and very digestible, to your point, Rebecca. It's not a whole bunch of jargon. You can read it, makes sense. They have summaries in there for you to unpack. Giving USA is a good site as well, y'all, for just the bigger picture of the scope of the climate of what's going on, and all of the charitable giving. And so, any other sources that y'all would suggest that people lean into, just to make sure that they can get good data, so that we can get them to not overthink it, to really be asking these questions? What else are we missing?
I think that's a really good set of options for that slice and that perspective. Maybe I'll cite one research study I did while I was at Stanford that looked at donor behavior, and the really high level takeaways on that were, number one, it seems that more donors are understanding the value of unrestricted gifts to organizations, but not understanding the value of multi-year. And the disconnect there was, and the real light bulb moment was, nonprofits also were reporting they were getting more unrestricted gifts because they were asking for it. They were not getting more multi-year gifts. They were not asking for it. So you could read the report, or you could just write down those two takeaways. And the takeaway for the organizations is, continue asking for unrestricted gifts, have that be your default, and to structure some options for donors in a multi-year format. Because if you don't ask for it, you might not get it. And so you might as well try. And that's what helps shift some of that with the unrestricted giving. So no need to read the report. That's the TLDR.
That's awesome. I won't add additional reports to read, but I would just put out a call to action for anyone in the community listening, to take a micro step. So before you start reading the report or the article or your newspaper, whatever, like the blog post, just say, how can I take a micro step after I read this, and what am I going to do with this information? And that way the commitment is kind of like pre-made, and will allow you to, again, like, see yourself in the work, see yourself in action, because it feels good. Like, giving feels good. Philanthropy feels good. This is a joyful, abundant space. We have the tools, we have the resources. It's just about unlocking it. So thank you so much.
I love that. Well, I definitely have enjoyed. I hope that every person that is tuned in, there's lots of good resources in the chat, y'all. And I really hope that this spoke to your heart in a way that makes you think differently about data. We need it, y'all. We need it to really help us to continue advocating for justice and liberation of all peoples, especially communities of color who are getting attacked left and right across, economic, the Supreme Court justices, all of that stuff. And so philanthropy is a beautiful space for us to not perpetuate those inequities, but to disrupt them. Clearly, full stop, period. And so I hope that we need one another. We all need to see ourselves in this, and data can help us to do just that. And so I thank y'all so much for your insights. This was so rich. Is there any other last inspiring word that y'all want to give to the people as they move forward in their weeks and really sit with what we've shared with today?
I think I don't think I have anything so profound. I think if you are collecting information and you're learning things, please share it with the world so others can learn from it and find ways to take their own action. I think we are all better off when we share information as opposed to guard it as trade secrets. So that might be my parting plea.
I love that. I love that. And I'll just re-echo, like replug what Erinn had said earlier in terms of don't overthink it. Don't get overwhelmed. Like, we've got this and we are in a space of abundance. So lean in. We got it.
Awesome. All right, y'all. Well, I'll GiveTeam and all of the work that Rebecca is doing, her foundation, the work that we're doing here at Philanthropy Together. Y'all can find us. We are not hidden. We're in plain sight. And so I hope that y'all would even see yourselves with us, shoulder to shoulder in this work. And so plug into the work that we're doing in our individual organizations. And let's just continue to move the needle, y'all. We need to disrupt these inequities. And so take good care of yourself. Thank you all for joining us. And also, I should plug in real quick. What's this month? July? We're in July. I'm like, COVID has disrupted even. What month is this? What day is this? Coming up next month is Black Philanthropy Month. And then after that, we have like Give to Women and Girls Day. It's just so many initiatives, y'all, for us to plug in also that I hope that y'all would just consider and already have it on your radar in ways and how you can see yourself to support. Because even those initiatives like Black Philanthropy Month, and Rebecca and I are writing something beautiful that we hope will be out in the world about that. But we want y'all to stay plugged into the movement, even if, whether it's with the data, just it's so important for all of us to just stay educated and stay plugged into what's going on. And so Black Philanthropy Month and so many other beautiful initiatives are coming up. And I hope you see yourselves in those movements as well.
Beautiful. Thank you for holding space for us, Ty. Erinn, it's beautiful to be in conversation with you. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you, everyone. So appreciative. Take care.
No problem. Thank y'all. See you later.